science leads us to new knowledge, and new knowledge leads us to understand the world in a better way.
When we give nature a helping hand, its ability to help itself is truly remarkable.
Being optimistic is not a guarantee of success. Being fatalistic is a guarantee of failure. And we cannot fail in climate change.
Good evening. I'm Anne Mossop from the UNSW Centre for Ideas, and I'm very happy to welcome you to this event in our international series, where leading writers and thinkers from around the world are in conversation with UNSW researchers about new ideas, discoveries, and inspiration. We're coming to you from our homes in Sydney, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm speaking from, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Our conversation today is titled Saving Our Food. It brings together food waste expert Christian Reynolds from the Centre for Food Policy at City University in London with Chris McElwain from UNSW Sydney. They'll be talking about food waste, sharing some of the really concerning statistics about how much of our food is wasted, not just in our households, but also in our sometimes very inefficient supply chains, and also what their research tells us about some simple solutions to reducing food waste. Our host tonight, Christopher McElwain, is a teaching fellow and PhD candidate in the Faculty of Law and Justice here at UNSW Sydney. His research explores sustainability and regulation, focusing on waste prevention and resource recovery. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Anne. My name is Chris McElwain, and I'm from the UNSW's Faculty of Law and Justice. Welcome to the Centre for Ideas talk this evening, Saving Our Food. Before we meet Christian Reynolds this evening, I too would like to acknowledge that the land upon which UNSW Sydney is located has traditional custodians, and those traditional custodians are the Bedigal people of the Eora Nation. I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you for joining us this evening on our talk about saving our food. Before we meet Christian, I would just like to explain how you can participate in the talk tonight. And some of you have already submitted questions, and we will be setting aside some time after about 45 minutes to address some of those questions. But you can participate in other ways, effectively live. So there are several ways you can do that. You can submit questions in the chat under the YouTube video. You can take part by using the Slido app, S-L-I-D-O, or using the Slido website at sli.do, and you need to use the hashtag UNSW. You can also comment or put questions on the UNSW Centre for Ideas Facebook page. And finally, if you tweet your questions using the hashtag UNSW, all capitals, ideas, all lowercase, all one word, then that comes to us as well. So now it's my very great pleasure, and I'm excited and indeed delighted to have here tonight one of the global rock stars of food waste research, Dr. Christian Reynolds. And Christian is a senior lecturer at the Centre for Food Policy at City University in London, and he's coming to us live from a very early hour in the UK. Hello, Christian.
Hello and good evening, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So right off the bat, Christian, just before we move on to looking at the scandal of food waste and how cities and individuals and nations and businesses are moving to meet the challenge of food waste, let's learn a little bit more about you and your Australian connections. Tell us a bit about your early career research and how that involved Australia.
All right, thank you, Chris. So for those of you who can't tell from my accent, I'm originally from Australia. I grew up in New South Wales in Coffs Harbour, and then for my undergraduate, I moved to Adelaide. And so I have degrees from the University of Adelaide. And during that time, I took a course on the anthropology of food. And this blew my mind entirely because it made me realize that all of these things I've been learning about economics and about politics could be applied to food. And so I started looking around for a PhD, and there was a group funded by an ARC linkage project called Saving Our Food, and they were looking for different PhD students. So I came on as one of the 4 or 5 different PhD students funded through that project back in 2012 or 2010 to 2012. And I graduated from the University of South Australia with a PhD in applied mathematics, which surprised everybody, including myself, because I started with a PhD in psychology, but through different supervisorial changes, I ended up with a PhD in applied mathematics from University of South Australia, where I was quantifying Australia's food waste for the first time. So looking at the size of the environmental impact, but also how different states or territories and how even different municipalities should be dealing with food waste back in the early 2010s, as it were. So coming out of the global financial crisis, the Australian Institute had published this amazing paper saying we've got this problem. And so we started researching this problem and starting to say, how big is it? How can we actually start changing it? And how can we do this in a joined up manner? But that was, now a decade ago, we started thinking about these things. And it's great to see where Australia has gotten to. But again, as we're going to say tonight, spoiler alert, there's still a lot left to go. We still have a huge challenge left.
It's very true. And before we move on to that, though, I do want to let you blow your own trumpet a tiny bit more, Christian. Tell us a bit more about your PhD and how you went about, what was the result in terms of quantification of the level of waste in Australia?
Right. So it was a brutally hard 3 years of looking for different bits of data sources. So for those of you who are not aware, waste management is usually a state issue. And back in the early 2010s, there was not as much data online or linkages between states and territories as we have today, which means that each government or each state department was measuring things in slightly different ways, and nobody was really measuring food waste beyond the municipal level. And so the big thing that I did was harmonize all of these different databases, link them up, work with some of the people at the Australian Bureau of Statistics and linking these up, and also getting some mentorship from some groups at the University of Sydney and getting the environmental impacts, linking that all together. And so I came up with a figure that there was 7.3 million tonnes of food waste in the UK, and broke that down to different parts of the economy, as it were. And then, surprise, surprise, me most of all, when the national baseline statistics came out a few years later, and it came out with 7.6 tonnes instead. So again, amazing to see that my work was then validated about 5 or 6 years later by the Australian government's own statisticians and consulting on that. So again, it was an early version of these different things, but it was brilliant to see that some of my work had been validated later on. And then I've had chances to be involved in other pieces of Australian food waste research over the years. So looking at, say, informal waste, looking at backyard composting or feeding to chickens or feeding to pets, as well as, say, quantifying the positive good and possible negative benefits of groups such as OzHarvest and other food rescue organizations. And so I say that saying that, they all have cars on the road, polluting the atmosphere. But at the same time, for OzHarvest groups and things like that, they're generating and reducing carbon footprint through capturing the food and feeding it to people. So there is lots of trade-offs you've got to think in these places, and lots of different solutions to food loss and waste in Australia.
And it's remarkable. I think the remarkable thing is that your PhD about the levels of food waste in Australia was so accurate, 7.3, and I think the baseline might have initially said 7.3 million tonnes, a staggering amount in Australia that we're wasting still that much food. But the more recent feasibility study, I think, is 7.67 million tonnes or something. So, but very nice accuracy in your early research. I also wanted to mention just briefly, one of the reasons you are one of the global rock stars of food waste research is your lead role in, I'm not sure if you can see what I'm holding up, Christian, A Thing of Beauty, your collection of essential research on food waste around the world.
Thank you very much, Chris. So that's the Routledge Handbook of Food Waste. So that was myself with a group of other researchers around the world saying, what did we wish we'd known when we started out in looking at research around food loss and waste? What would an aspiring policymaker or someone sitting down in a council office they're going, you're going to work on food waste now? What would I have wanted to know when I started out? And so we together wrote the book and emailed different authors and said, you know this area better than anybody else. Could you write this sort of chapter? And so all of those chapters can be available open access online, as well as in a hardcover format through purchasing the book from Routledge. So it's definitely a resource that anybody can try and access to get a really fundamental understanding of food waste, both in Australia or any part of the world. And we really try to take an intersectional viewpoint, thinking about food loss and waste from many different angles, and trying to get voices from the global south and other indigenous communities feeding into that as well, because food waste isn't just an issue for corporations or for citizens generally, it's a grassroots issue as well, and everybody can do something about food loss and waste.
All right, well, let's turn to the scandalous part of food waste. What do we know about global levels, and what are the impacts of that?
Right. So at the global level, let's get the headline statistics out the way. So from what we know, about 1/3 of food never reaches a human stomach. So that means it's going somewhere else in the food system. That could be it's going towards animal feed, but at the same, or into say bio oils or things like that. But a majority of that is also going as loss or waste. So there's a kind of definitional thing around loss and waste, and we might get to that in a little bit of time. But if we're thinking of it in terms of say climate change, because I think that's a hot topic, we can think about the food system as a whole contributing around 26 to 30%, depending on the accounting method you use for climate impacts. 26 to 30% of global climate emissions per year are due to our food system. Food loss and waste, because of slight differences in impacts, is equivalent to about 8% of climate emissions. So food that is wasted, not going into human mouths, not having a purpose, being left to rot, being a waste of resources, is about 8% of our global climate emissions. So that's a staggering amount. So if we want to fix our climate change, if we want to fix our food system for multiple reasons, looking at food loss and waste is a prime way to start changing other things within our food system. And that's the big reason we need to look at it. But at each country as well, there are different drivers, because food loss and waste means a loss or a waste of resources. So fertilizers, inputs. It means a loss of time of people working in the food sector, chopping things, taking them, farming them, growing them, that is then wasted. So there's multiple reasons for actually wanting to reduce food waste and reduce food loss there.
And the numbers are staggering. The 2011 FAO number was 1.3 billion tonnes per year. But more recently, I think some work by WWF UK and UNEP in 2021 was finding 1.2 billion tonnes lost on farms and 900 million tonnes lost in the rest of the food system. So that's about 2.1 billion tonnes. In the words of Vaseem from The Princess Bride, these numbers are inconceivable.
That's exactly what I was about to say. For us as individuals, these are inconceivable amounts of food waste. So I used to work for a global food loss and waste charity called the Waste Resources Action Program, or the shorthand of WRAP. And we used to, say this is this number of buses or this number of Wembley stadiums. But even then, it becomes numbers that are so big that they just lose all meaning. So I used to volunteer pre-COVID, of course, at a food rescue organization. So we would be taking food from supermarkets that was at its best before. So it was still safe to eat, but it was not fit for sale anymore for quality reasons. And they will be redistributing that, if it's vegetables or bread, to people in need. Or people in food insecurity. And so they were taking this surplus. But even the amount we were getting from one or two local supermarkets still was too much for us as a small funded charity to process. And so even at that level of local individual, it for want of a better word, blows my mind in terms of the amount of food that's coming. And if we think of that in terms of supermarket waste, for instance, that's an extremely efficient system. And for supermarket waste, we're thinking only about 4 to 5%, depending where we are in the world. In Australia and UK, it's around 4 to 5% of supermarket waste is wasted because they don't want to waste food. They want to have profit. They want to sell it to people. And so even that amount there, which is a very small amount for the supermarkets, is a staggering amount for other people to process and realize is food waste. So that's the seen amount of food waste. And then if we think in terms of the unseen food waste, the staggering statistic for, say, Australia and the UK is about 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 bags of food you bring into your home on average goes to waste. So that means that you're wasting 1/4 or 1/5 of your weekly food budget by it just being wasted, which is a staggering amount of waste there. And that's unseen or not noticed by many people. So much of the research I've done or others have done, such as Professor David Evans, has shown that people just don't notice this waste happening until you actually start making them alert to it, and making them realize that this waste occurs, and then they start changing their behavior. But again, there's all these different tensions. So food waste can be unseen, and food waste is just unimaginable in the amount that there is. But there is good news. We can do something there. But sorry, you're about to say something.
No, that's okay. We'll get to some solutions shortly. But where is it occurring, say, in developed countries? Whereabouts in the food system are we seeing it? You've mentioned that households are a big source. Where else does the research show it's happening?
So this is a really interesting point. Food waste happens across the entire food supply chain. So it happens on farm. So it can even happen pre-harvest if we think about it. But let's just take it from the point of harvest, because then we know it's definitely food that's coming off the farm. It can happen there. It can then happen, say, if we're taking a vegetable, at the pack house. So it goes from the farm to a place, it gets washed, sorted. It might be a wonky shape. It might not fit specifications. It could get knocked out and become waste there. It could then go on to a secondary processor. So it could be, say, grain being milled. There could be waste there. It travels up the chain, and there is food loss and waste at every single stage. There are inefficiencies at every stage of this food supply chain. And so there are different amounts of food waste happening at these different stages based on the type of food that it is. And so there's a combination here of what interventions or things we can enact in terms of policy, or things we can do with different groups to actually change the amounts of food loss and waste based on where it's happening. But if you're wanting, say, an overall answer, households are contributing 30 to 40% of per country food loss and waste. But then you also have food loss and waste in each other part of the chain. So hospitality has an amount, supermarkets, as I've said, about 5% of total turnover is lost or wasted, depending on which supermarket and what products you're talking about. So there's large amounts at different points of the chain. And I guess the complexity is if you solve it and make something not waste down the chain or not wasted down the chain, it can then be sold further up the chain, which means it gives people more opportunities to waste that food later on, or it to be sold into new markets. While if you waste or stop wasting things up the chain, people might buy less, and so it might have ripples back down the chain. So there's lots of these system-wide complexities in terms of how you solve food loss and waste. But overall, it's spread throughout, but in all countries now, households, whether it's developed, developing, wherever you are, households are one of the big factors of food loss and waste, but we shouldn't blame the consumer there, because there are system-based lock-ins, which I'm sure we'll come to, that mean that the consumers are locked into wasting a certain amount of food. So that could be packs, portion size, etc. But I'm sure we'll come to that in a second.
Yeah.
Does that help, or does that set the scene?
Yes, I think now we know some of the scale of the scandal, and we know what some of the impacts are. And some countries started moving on food waste, like the UK, much earlier, but maybe you might want to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular 12.3, and how that's been a driver for action before we look at some solutions.
Brilliant. Yes, no, you're really right to bring up the Sustainable Development Goals. So the Sustainable Development Goals are global goals that are set for sustainability to end in 2030. And there are these different goals relating to different things. And so Sustainable Development 12 is specifically related to sustainability with Sustainable Development Goal 12.3. So there's a very long list of different goals there related to food loss and waste. And this is where I'm going to get very bureaucratic for a second. So sorry, guys, this is the perfect streaming that you want, is to think about bureaucracy and exact wording. But the goal 12.3 is broken down into two parts. Part one says we need to halve food waste by 2030. Part two says and reduce food loss. And kind of in brackets, it's not actually saying this, but where possible. So reduce food loss, but halve food waste by 2030. So this is why I talk about reducing food loss and waste, because there are two different concepts, as it were, and each of those concepts is run by a different organization. So so the top part of it, the food waste part, is administered and measured by the UN Environment Programme. While the bottom half, which is loss, which is linking to agricultural food waste, so things happening down the supply chain, so from pack house, on farm, etc., that's counted by the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, and that's looking and measuring slightly differently. So the main goal that we're all concerned with is halving food loss and waste, but the big thing in the Sustainable Development Goal is halving food waste. So that closer to the consumer waste in restaurants, in supermarkets, in homes as well. Now, the really powerful thing about SDG, or Sustainable Development Goal 12.3, is they have a group behind them called Champions 12.3, which is a body of actors, or a group of international CEOs, of activists, of people from all walks of life who are getting behind this to say, in my company, I am signing a pledge to help mobilize my company, my efforts towards being an ambassador to make 12.3 happen. So this means they're sharing knowledge, they're sharing resources, because back when the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, first came out, the Champions Group made a business case for food loss and waste reduction. And so they said that we need to actually show all businesses that it's worth their while to reduce food loss and waste. And the powerful thing is they've come out with a study that shows, so this is in American dollars, I know not Australian dollars, but there's a 14-to-1 payback ratio in some hospitality industries, and overall it's a 7-to-1 payback ratio throughout more of the food system, in terms of for every dollar, whether it's US or Australian, I guess, or pound if you're in the UK, you put into food waste, there's a 14 or 7-fold return on investment of that in terms of reducing food waste. And then they've given in measures to enable businesses and education resources and different things to enable. So there's lots of global movements out there helping to be coordinated by this Champions 12.3 network. And so there are many different actors globally trying to help reduce and foster food waste reduction efforts. And so that's CEOs of major companies through to chefs in restaurants, through to people on the ground level. So this is a very much a multi-pronged attack. And it shows that hopefully by 2030, we can have a much stronger hold and, fingers crossed, have reduced food loss and waste. So one of the Australian government ambitions is to reduce food waste by 2030 by half. And so one of the big things that I've been working on over the last year is supporting FIAL in doing some of the modelling to see with what policy mixes we need to actually reduce food loss and waste to be to meet that goal. Shall I do a spoiler there, Chris?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the big spoiler with that is that the Australian government and Australians in general have it within their capacity to actually get to 52% food waste reduction if we, did a sensible policy mix. If we threw the kitchen sink at food waste, we could by 2030 reduce it further. But that would be, switching everything that we could, thinking about it day and night. But I think a more reasonable thing is there's a lot of change that needs to happen within the next 2 to 3 years, but we can do that as Australia. I know I'm saying I'm based in the UK. I'm still an Australian citizen. We can reduce food loss and waste there to reduce it to 52% of what it was. That said, if we just continue where we are, let's continue with the current things we're doing. So we're not accelerating, we're just keeping our foot on the accelerator at the same pace we are. That's only going to result in about a 23% reduction in food loss and waste, which is not enough to meet the targets. It's not enough for climate change, and it has actually negative consequences for bigger economic impacts compared to if we went all out and did that bigger policy mix, because there are actually positive economic benefits. As I was saying, the 14 or 7 to 1 for Australia as a nation, reducing food waste makes economic sense, it makes climate sense, and it makes water sense. There's all of these tick boxes that we can have there. And this is a very broad mix of actions that need to be undertaken by individuals, citizens in their homes, but also by each level of government as well as industry. It's a united effort for food loss and waste in Australia, but we can do it. And I guess I'm being overwhelmingly positive here to energize and say we've got about 3 years of intense action ahead of us to make sure we meet that 2030 target. We've got to set the framework now to enable that. I know I'm speaking very broadly there, but again, we can do this, which is really exciting.
That's very positive. I might invite a few questions in relation to that in a little while. So there's a few things arising out of that. One of the things that Australia doesn't seem to have gone down the path of, though, is talking about food loss and food waste in its national strategies. It's adopted something that I think is a bit more ambitious, just talking about food waste in general, in reference across the entire food system, and calling for a halving everywhere.
Yeah, so it's a definite tension, I think, in terms of where food loss and waste features within government policy documents, as well as setting down frameworks for how we go about that. So within our modelling, we showed that it's not a reduction of half in each single sector, because some sectors are a lot harder to move than others. So I've been working in this area for a decade plus, and household food waste is really hard to shift. Because it's based on a population growth thing. So you can reduce it per capita, but per capita there are more people. And so therefore it keeps on climbing sneakily at the fundamental level. But also people, habits, their practices all change over time. And food waste is sometimes not the top priority of everybody in the household. It's definitely not the top priority. Let's be honest here, of everybody in the household all the time. And so the gains you can see in, say, a household, at best, I'm personally thinking we'll get 20 to 23% reduction from household over that time. If we were to get a 50% reduction, that would be amazing, but that would be unheard of in terms of global food waste movements. You need to throw a lot of money at household behavior change in order to get that. There are much more efficient ways to reduce food waste and reduce higher carbon, higher water footprint food waste back up the chain, which means consumers never have to even think about wasting it. So yes, consumers and households and citizens need to change their behavior, and we need to also have things in place further up the chain which enable them. But to your point, yes, so some policy documents are talking about halving throughout the food chain, and there's a more nuanced perspective saying different parts of the chain need to be doubled down. So in supermarkets, we need to eliminate it virtually entirely. In other parts of industry, we need to eliminate it virtually entirely. But in households, there's a tension there because we have to understand that food waste is not the top priority for every citizen, and neither should it be. So let's think about that. But it's great, the Australian government's ambition and different states and territories' ambition, but coordinating those so that it's both a benefit for the wider food system and other food system issues such as health, such as environment, such as jobs, etc., is a big tension within all of these different policy documents that are coming out.
So let's explore that a little bit, and I think you've very nicely brought out how we need both individual behaviour change, and there's been a big long-running program in the UK, Love Food, Hate Waste, run by WRAP, WARP, WAP, and then that's been adopted in Australia, initially by the New South Wales Environment Protection Authority, and then picked up in Victoria and Brisbane City Council and the ACT, and that's trying to bring about that household behaviour change. Let's talk about that perhaps in a sec. What does your research show about effective interventions that might be good for systemic change?
That's a really good question. Yeah, so there's things that we can do in terms of behavior change interventions. So things, as you've just said, that are love food, hate waste, changing people's practices. But there are things further up the chain that we could be thinking about. So one of the big things, if we're thinking in terms of different sectors, is say portion size or packaging size that could knock on and change household waste. Because I was talking earlier about structural lock-ins. And so for an example, if you go to a supermarket and you buy certain types of fruits and vegetables, they'll come in plastic packaging sometimes. Or if you buy bakery products for rolls, they'll come in a 6-pack of rolls. You may be an individual, a single person living alone. You can't eat those 6 rolls before they go off. The modelling that we've looked at in the UK, for instance, has shown that the standard 800-gram sliced loaf of bread is not, well, with the current bread consumption in the UK, you don't get through it if you're a family of 2 easily unless you're having bread for every meal. So you need to think about, can we either reduce the size of the loaves? Can we keep loaves fresher for longer? Can we change packaging, portion size, all of these sorts of wider food system-based interventions, enabling the consumers to waste less. So there's these different things that we could be doing. At the same point, some of the most exciting interventions I've also seen for consumers are changing the size of your plate. So that even changing the size of the plate and the serving spoon you use actually changes the amount you eat. So you're still feeling full, but you put less on your plate. And likewise, there is less waste after that. So there are different things we can do at a very simple level. But you could also think of this in terms of where can we go in terms of high-tech Internet of Things, Internet of Food things. And there's lots we could do in terms of linking through to AI, linking through to machine learning, in terms of thinking about all these different integrated data sets, integrated logistics, which is there. It's just applying and thinking about predicting, forecasting, all of these different things to make sure we have the most efficient supply chain, and more importantly for Australia, an efficient chill chain. So because of Australia's variable heat, having a very strong refrigerated capacity and having that at different points and making sure the food comes from the field into the chill chain if it's a high value product, so dairy, etc. So it's high value, high carbon footprint. We need dairy to be chilled and have the longest shelf life, because our models have found that even 1 extra day of shelf life reduces food waste dramatically. But with that as well, you have open life of different food. So for instance, when you have a pot of yogurt, there's a different shelf life that you have when it's open as opposed to it's a closed sealed container, which means that for food waste, it's actually better to buy 6 pots of small yogurt and you break one, eat, recycle your plastic, compared to having one big kilo tub. However, you then get these trade-offs with plastic waste. And the news is, in terms of Australia's plastic recycling and capacity right now, there's a different story there. Again, I've gone really narrow down into focus, but just showing you how complicated some of these different aspects are relating to how we change the system for both positive environmental benefit, positive economic benefit, and wider reductions in food waste. So thinking of these big system-based things, improving the chill chain, improving transport and logistics, making better roads. These are not sexy things, are they? But they do really help, and they will reduce the carbon impact, and they will be leading to people being better off in terms of finance, but also there being better economic resilience throughout the economy.
And I just want to explore something that might be lurking as a bit of a game changer at the very beginning of the food system, and that is in primary production. We know that there are many causes of waste pre and post harvest, and you've mentioned some of them, like specifications. I'm wondering if there are other technologies like vertical farming or controlled irrigation or greenhouse production, or even right at the frontier at the moment, lab-grown meat, which could have impacts on the way we produce food and minimizing waste. Do you have anything to say about that?
That's a really good question. Again, you're hitting me with all these amazing questions, and I'm looking forward to the questions coming up in a few minutes from the wider Twitterverse and Facebook, etc. So in regards to different farming methods coming along, so Australia has a lot of farmland per capita, but also just generally globally, Australia has a lot of farmland and very few labourers per acre, as it were. So you're quite efficient in terms of that. And there are issues, as we've seen in terms of COVID, of resilience, of getting people to the right place to harvest the crop at the right time in terms of labour and capacity issues. So that's definitely a issue. And so in the UK, I've been working with a wider group of researchers looking at how you can deploy robotics and other high-tech pieces of equipment into making filling those labour gaps, standardizing, putting these things into the field to reduce those sorts of loss and waste. But at the same time, there are big structural issues there. So yes, we can be plugging these things, but it's not the only thing that Australia needs to sort out in terms of that. So yes, we need to be thinking about these bigger technologies, but at the same point, there are simple solutions as well in terms of thinking about how much we pay for our crops. So in terms of, yes, that might be a slight price rise, but it's also getting the supermarket, say, to give whole purchase agreements. So the supermarket says to the farmer, I will buy the entirety of your crop, as so that means all the wonky bits, I have to then just find things to do with all that wonky food. You just have to worry about growing and harvesting it. And that gives economic certainty to the farmer, as well as meaning that the supermarket has to invest in these wider range of things. But if you're thinking in terms of robotics, drones, urban farming, all of these have their place, but there's no silver bullet here. So definitely in terms of urban farming or growing short shelf life items, so fresh herbs, etc., or say mushrooms from food waste products, those are all really useful things that can happen within an urban environment. But some things we still need rural agricultural land to grow. And so that's not going to change anytime soon in terms of the scale that we need.
Of course. I just want to turn to an intervention that's been long running in the UK, the Quartile Commitments, and it's something that's been picked up in Australia as the Australian Food Pact. So you mentioned there's been a rapid amount of work on food waste in Australia. We had the National Food Strategy in 2017, and then we created the Fight Food Waste CRC based in South Australia in 2018. We've got the new regulatory agency, Stop Food Waste Australia, and it's administering the Australian Food Pact, and some companies have signed on. What's your research showing about how those voluntary commitment programs work?
Right. So the Quartile Commitment is a UK-based voluntary agreement that's been running since the early to mid 2000s, and it was originally focusing on packaging, food waste, carbon, kind of this trifecta. And each iteration, it's kind of a 5-year plan to say over these 5 years, all the people, all the organizations that sign up, we commit together to measure our impacts for food waste, packaging, carbon, and then reduce accordingly as a collective, which means some people could be kicking their feet, but internally they'll be named and shamed. They won't be shamed to the outside community, but they will internally. And so the Quartile over this time, so it was named after the place where the signing happened, the Quartile Gallery of Art in London. So the Quartile Commitment has continued to evolve over those years. So there was Quartile 1, Quartile 2, Quartile 3, Quartile 2025, and now Quartile 2030. So you can see the theme that's emerging there. They're setting these 5-year plans or so to assess what is happening and set new targets. So they're effective to a degree, because it means that everybody is working together, investing in the technology, investing in studies or sprint groups to say what works in these different areas. And so while working at WRAP, I worked closely in the Quartile area. I didn't work on Quartile, but I worked for research feeding into the Quartile Commitment. So highlighting I have a vested viewpoint, as it were, within the Quartile Commitment and outcomes from that. And currently some of my current work on food waste and plastic packaging is possibly next on this Thursday going to come out to look at how loose versus packaged fruits and vegetables in the UK may be changing. But keep your eyes out for that on Thursday or Friday this week, Australian time. So again, it's a mechanism that enables funding, and it enables 96% of the entire retail market in the UK to actually work together on this problem, trade best practice, and together measure at a standardized level and bring it down. And that's effective because there's no government legislation in this at this moment, because the government isn't legislating. So as somebody in the Centre for Food Policy at City University of London, I could also say it would be amazing if the government said, as the EU government has done, is said that all countries need to measure food waste, all companies need to measure food waste at a certain level. And that's not happening. We're in Brexit land, so we're outside those measurements to a degree. So there are different strengths and weaknesses to the voluntary approach, because it's not legally binding, it's your peers who are binding. But it is having progress, and the voluntary agreement also works because these people understand the practicalities of running a business in terms of where they know they actually have capacity to reduce and have that time frame and commitments there. So it's a double-edged sword, definitely. You can come out with hard policy and regulatory measures, which we could do as the Australian government, but for now, and in our modelling, even just the voluntary approach accelerated to the pace it needs to be accelerated will be enough to help reduce food waste, because it causes other knock-on effects within the food system, which itself help to reduce food waste. So it changes and primes the supply chains as well as the main companies. Sorry, that's a really long question to a very technical thing, which hopefully everybody online is staying engaged with. But again, it's a big mover and a shaker in terms of the pact in Australia that has so much potential to reduce food loss and waste in Australia, but individual citizens might not be even aware it's happening right now.
Yes, and I think it's the UK experience might show that because there's no silver bullet, you need a wide range of tools, and it did look like the Conservative government was going to introduce mandatory reporting, but that might have fallen away. Maybe we can turn now a little bit to some of the questions that people have been submitting and the pre-submitted questions. But perhaps just before that happens, I can share a few low-tech solutions that we use at home for householders on wasted food, because that's a big issue for lots of people. How can we contribute to saving food at home? And I know you might have one or two items there that you might want to share with us.
What have we both brought for show and tell? So my big tip, as it were, for everybody is to check the temperature of your fridge. So there's a website called Chill the Fridge Out, which if you Google that, it gives you the instructions for UK fridges, but they're the same manufacturers are in Australia. And set your fridge to 5 degrees C or below, because that means you get an extra day of shelf life or an extended shelf life on all your fridge-based goods. But that's a really low-hanging fruit. But the other things that we could be doing are things like packs and portion sizes, I say, measuring the portion. So for instance, this is a intervention from Love Food, Hate Waste. It's a cup, but it's a half cup, but it's actually only 100 mil rather than 125 mil, which means you're taking 25 grams less of whatever you're scooping. So if it's rice or if it's pasta or whatever. And likewise, actually measuring out things. So this is from the Dutch food waste program. And surprise, surprise, this is from the UK one. You can see they're pretty similar. One has Dutch language on it, though. But this has a pasta measurer on the bottom for different portion sizes and just different amounts to actually say. So it's a nutrition intervention as well as a food intervention. So measuring your food, making sure you're cooking the right amount. If you know you're not going to cook leftovers, don't eat leftovers, don't cook leftovers. So understand how food fits into your life. But again, for something everyone can do after this, go and check your fridge and make sure it's below 5 degrees centigrade. What have you got in your show and tell before we go to questions?
I just wanted to share, let's just share two things. I wanted to show what I call food huggers, which are just silicone cups. And I find them very useful if you have, say, half a piece of citrus left over from a gin and tonic. Why you'd have anything left over after a gin and tonic, I don't know. But very useful for holding fruit and vegetables and then storing it in the fridge. And then I'm also quite fond of a cloth bag. It has a brand name in Australia called the Swag. But you can substitute a slightly damp tea towel, and these are very good for storing fruit and veg in the fridge crisper. In fact, they're so good that you have to make sure you remember to look in the crisper and check the Swag bag, because otherwise you might end up with some soggy cucumbers.
This is a thing in terms of just looking in the fridge and making sure you look in these different places, and it's a definite trade-off. So always a good thing to actually think about and look before you go shopping. That's a simple intervention that everyone can do.
Yes, that's very much part of the training of Love Food, Hate Waste, and I know Oz Harvest also run in Australia their Fight Food Waste program, and both of them commend people to go. The first step in forming good habits about food waste is checking what you have in the fridge or in the cupboard, and then shopping to a meal plan, not over serving, and then if you've got leftovers, learn to love your leftovers. And some of those steps are going to be able to help people get to that 20% reduction that we're looking for in the household sector.
Very much so.
Let's now here's an interesting question that's coming through online, and this was reflected in some of the pre-submitted questions. What about teaching food management to children? What do we know? I know there's a lot of emerging research on this.
Yeah, so in terms of teaching food management skills, I think it's a great idea, understanding how to cook, understanding how to manage food, brilliant things to think about. The flip side is we have been teaching different sorts of skills for a long time. And it also is putting all the emphasis again on the consumer to do right, instead of saying, hey, big supermarkets things, make sure it's in available portion sizes and pack sizes that we actually want it to have. And the easier things in terms of changing is back up the system. So we do need education. We do need to show people how to cook. But at the same point, it's thinking about how does that work in a big wider food systems narrative, because if we teach children how to cook, it's not just about food waste, it's also about healthy diets, and that has much bigger positive health implications as well for the health services.
And following on from that, we've had another question. Are there differences in food waste generation, and I might add food waste impacts, if you're having a vegetarian or vegan diet?
Really good question. Thank you to whoever submitted that. So
Anonymous.
Yes, Anonymous. Thank you, Anonymous. So based on what you buy is what you waste. And so, yes, there are differences in what waste you generate and at the speed at which you generate. So depending on the sort of vegan or vegetarian diet you have, it may be high in fruits and vegetables, which have unavoidable food waste. So peelings or things like that, that generates a baseline amount of food waste because of the fruits and vegetables you're eating there. So we ran a project in London called Trifocal, which was looking at healthy eating, healthy eating and sustainable diets, reducing food waste and recycling the food you couldn't actually, so the avoidable things like the scraps. And we found if you did all three of these as education campaigns in school, messaging at work, all these different areas, it meant that if you're moving towards sustainable diets, so lower meat, or vegan, vegetarian, if you want to go to the full extreme there, that reduces your dietary impacts, but also can reduce your total food waste, but it does narrowly increase your unavoidable food waste. So there's a slight tension there, but depends on what sort of vegan vegetarian diet you're going for. If it's all ultra processed vegan patties and things, again, that's not going to have much waste, but there might be health implications for you from eating all that ultra processed food. So there are lots of tensions here depending the dietary and food future you want for Australia and you want for yourself.
Yes, there's again, it's emphasizing there's no silver bullet and there's always going to be trade-offs in whatever solution. Now, I remember you mentioning early in your research career looking at how households dispose of food waste, either to sewer or to compost or feeding to pets. To deal with the waste they can't avoid. So you talked about unavoidable waste. In other words, when we've got the inedible parts of the food, which is giving rise to food waste, what are some of the best ways households can deal with that?
That, again, a great question. So in terms of household-based unavoidable food waste, thinking if you're living in a block of flats, lots of municipalities currently offer food waste pickup. And as part of the strategy, there's hopefully going to be a rollout of more household food waste recycling, turning it into either energy and then compost or just straight into compost in a municipal composting facility. But if you have the space, you could, of course, put in chickens or put in a compost bin of yourself. Australia actually has backyards, unlike the UK. But if we're thinking about that avoidable food waste up the chain, there are a couple of different more silver bullets you could think of. So one of the big things that we found is Australia could be feeding a lot more of its unavoidable food waste that's still edible, but is part of the production process, to animals. So increasing the amount of, say, pig feed or feeding it to insects, which those insects then get fed to chickens or fish in terms of aquaculture or egg-laying hens. So transforming the unavoidable food waste, the bits that have to happen, into food that we can eat within our society. And this is happening in Japan currently. And they have a brand of pork called Eco Pork, which is a premium brand of pork because these are high welfare animals that are very happy. And so Japanese consumer pays slightly more for the food waste fed pork. So there's different things we could do there. The other thing we could be doing is actually thinking about valorization. So we take our coffee bean and we extract the coffee oil from it. We extract the pectins. We extract all these different things from industry-based unavoidable food waste and transform those into new products we can sell. So there's lots of different things you can do both up the supply chain, but at the household level, do recycle, do compost if possible, and do get in touch with your municipal government to actually see what is possible in your municipality.
We kind of opened with, which is that the food waste is a big problem in two separate: save food, in other words, keeping food in the food system for human, but then properly managing the waste that we cannot avoid. Sides of the same coin. Sometimes interventions only work on one part of the problem, not the other part of the problem.
Very much so. It's a definite tension in terms of both reducing food waste, but also using and treating food if it is wasted in the best possible way. And that's a big tension around climate change as well, because we're wanting to reduce the amount of food waste and focus on the high carbon, high cost food wastes there. And this is about policy coherence. And what we're working on at the Centre for Food Policy is saying that all of these different policy goals try and align through the different policies that governments produce globally.
All right. Well, we're getting down to towards the end of this evening's conversation. I just wanted to explore before we finish. Well, perhaps I'll turn to this. If you had a magic wand and you could change anything about food systems, what would you be looking to do with your magic powers?
Right. Thank you, Chris. That's a good thing to end on. I think if I was to have a magic wand for Australia and Australian consumers or citizens, I would say get everybody to check their fridge and turn it down to 5 degrees centigrade. If I was having a magic wand for the entire world food system, I would probably change it so that we have higher wages for women farmers globally, because 70% of the global food is produced in rural or non large-scale production, and a large number of those are female farmers. And so having a more just amount of food or a more just payment for that would bring a lot of people out of poverty and enable lots of positive health outcomes and community outcomes across the globe. And that would also lead to less food waste happening and less food loss throughout the world in terms of different other structural things happening. And so empowering and paying more to female farmers would be the big silver bullet I could have there. Pay more to all farmers, but definitely more to female farmers as well.
Yes, and I think in terms of my own magic powers, I'd be looking to learn from the UK experience and leapfrog the 14 years of the Quartile Commitments and say perhaps Australia should be adding in legislation to bring forward reporting on food loss and food waste. We invest a lot of money here in our research and development corporations in the various parts of our agricultural sectors, and that reporting could be supported through the RDCs. I think, and that's looking at saving food. I think in terms of opportunities for better managing the wasted food, we could roll out the compulsory food and food organics collection and then divert that away from landfill through our municipal councils and roll that out right across Australia. Many councils are already taking that action, but that would be two steps: one dealing with saving food and one dealing with better managing wasted food, and rolling that up with a national education campaign of the kind like Love Food, Hate Waste. All right, we're getting close to the end, so let's try and end on a positive note. Christian, what do you think our prospects are, either in the UK or in Australia, for achieving our 2030 targets of halving food waste?
I think it's going to be a big challenge, but I think Australia, the UK, and the world is up to that. So I don't think if I can be doom and gloom, I think globally it's going to be a real struggle to hit that 2030 SDG target. But I think Australia and the UK are on the track to measure what is wasted, quantify it, and have that business case, because what gets measured, as you've just said, gets managed. And we can highlight now that it's a carbon impact, an economic impact, a water impact, and a social impact. So all of these different reasons we need to sort out food waste, and we have shown with our different reports that we have the capacity to be able to change the world by reducing our food waste. That's a great positive, and we can actually do this by 2030.
I agree. I think it is possible. We're going to have to work very, very hard to get there. Everybody's going to have to lean in, and all sectors of the Australian food system will have to be working hard to save food and better manage wasted food. So for those of you who are at home, now you know why Christian is one of the global rock stars of food waste research. You can join me in cyberspace in thanking Christian. Thank you very much, Christian, for joining us very early in the morning, and I look forward to seeing more of your work in the future. Thank you and good night.
Thank you very much. Good night.